No greetings. No words. No acknowledgement of the wary eyes that followed her every step. Then came the dogs. At first, just a low growl from the shadows. Then another. And another. Until the entire village seemed to tremble with the sound of bared teeth and furious barking. Even the oldest among them had never seen dogs react this way, not to a stranger, not to anyone. And in that moment, as the last sliver of daylight bled from the sky, one thing became clear. Whatever she was, whatever she carried with her, it had been waiting to return. In the heart of the African savanna, a new presence unsettled the peace of Elugina. She arrived with the sun casting long shadows behind her, her form barely noticeable at first as she trudged through the dusty path leading into the village. Clad in a faded green wrapper, she carried an old, tattered bag slung over her shoulder, her steps slow but deliberate. Her head remained bowed, her gaze hidden beneath the hood of her shawl. The villagers, ever welcoming, stopped their chores to observe the stranger. It was custom to greet new faces with warmth, but this woman neither paused nor acknowledged their presence. "Welcome, sister," called out a woman pounding yam in a mortar. Others joined in, waving their hands and offering smiles. But the woman did not respond. She did not even glance their way. She merely kept walking, her feet kicking up small clouds of dust as she moved with an eerie silence. The villagers exchanged confused glances. "Perhaps she is tired from her journey," one suggested. "Or maybe she does not speak our language," another added. But there was something else, something deeper, that made the villagers uneasy. They couldn't quite place it, but the air around her felt different, heavy, as if she carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. She walked straight to the outskirts of the village, where an abandoned mud hut stood, its roof partially caved in and its walls covered in creeping vines. Without hesitation, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind her. The villagers, puzzled by her peculiar behavior, murmured amongst themselves but decided to let her be. The next morning, the sun rose over Elugina, casting warm light upon the dewy grass. The market square bustled with traders setting up their stalls, the scent of smoked fish and freshly ground pepper wafting through the air. The village had nearly forgotten about the strange woman until a young man named Jer, known for his curiosity, decided to greet her properly. He waited outside the hut, arms crossed, until she finally emerged carrying a small clay pot. He smiled warmly. "Good morning, sister. Welcome to Elugina. My name is Jer. If you need anything, just let me know." The woman didn't respond. She didn't even look at him. Without a word, she walked past him, heading towards the village stream. Jer stood frozen, his smile fading. He had never been ignored so blatantly before. Shaking his head, he hurried back to his friends. "She didn't even acknowledge me," he told them. "It was like I wasn't even there." Word spread quickly. The villagers tried to greet her in different places, the market, the river, the palm wine shop, but she never spoke, never even nodded in response. It was as if she existed in a world separate from theirs. Soon, they began calling her the Silent One. But as time passed, the villagers noticed something even stranger. The woman, whom they now referred to as Ifil, had an unusual affinity for dogs. Almost every day, she was seen leading a dog into her hut or taking one out. At first, the villagers thought little of it. Many kept dogs for protection or hunting. But Ifil's dogs were different. She would bring a dog into her house one day and return it the next, only to replace it with another. She buys them and then sells them back the next day, noted Olikan, the village's dog seller. At first, he found it amusing. She paid the full price without bargaining, something unheard of in the village. But as time went on, even he became uneasy. The dogs act strange around her, he confessed to his wife one evening. They bark at her as if they've seen a spirit. And indeed, that was the most unsettling part. Whenever Ife walked through the village, the dogs reacted violently. Even the commonest ones, those who had never growled at a human before, would bare their teeth, their fur standing on edge as they snarled at her. It was not the playful barking of greeting, nor the warning barks of territorial disputes. It was something primal, something fearful. At first, the villagers dismissed it as coincidence. Dogs barked all the time. But when it continued to happen, day after day, with every single dog in the village reacting the same way, whispers began to circulate. "Why do the dogs hate her?" a woman asked, clutching her child tightly. "Perhaps she is cursed," another suggested, glancing at Ife's hut with wary eyes. Children began daring each other to go near her home, but their courage always crumbled when the chorus of barking erupted the moment they stepped too close. Parents warned their children to stay away. The fear in the village grew, silent but pervasive. One evening, Oleken himself confronted Ife. "Why do my dogs act like this when they see you?" he demanded, sweat glistening on his forehead. She did not answer. She simply pointed at another dog, handed him the coins, and left. The fear deepened. The villagers pleaded with the elders to send her away. But before a decision could be made, something even more terrifying happened. One fateful afternoon, as Ife walked through the village, the barking reached a fever pitch. But this time, the dogs did not just bark. They began following her. One by one, from different corners of Elugina, they emerged, their eyes locked onto her as they growled. At first, it was just a few. Then a dozen. Then more. A sea of dogs, snarling, snapping their jaws, moving as one. The villagers watched in horror as the dogs encircled her, their backs turning into deafening howls. Ife stopped, her entire body rigid. For the first time, there was fear in her eyes. She turned in slow circles, realizing there was no escape. The crowd of villagers had gathered now, watching the scene unfold with bated breath. "What is happening?" someone whispered. "She has done something terrible," an old man murmured. "The dogs know." Then, for the first time since she had arrived, Ife spoke. Her voice, hoarse and desperate, cut through the chaos. "Help me," she screamed. "Please." The villagers gasped. She could speak. The realization sent a wave of shock through the crowd. But no one stepped forward to help her. "You must confess," an elder bellowed. "Tell us what you have done, or the dogs will not stop." The dogs pressed in closer, their eyes glowing with fury. Ife trembled, tears streaming down her face. Her silence was no longer an option. She had no choice. And as the villagers leaned in, holding their breath, she opened her mouth to speak the truth. A truth so horrifying, so unspeakable, that it would shake the entire village to its core. The silence that followed Ife's cry for help was as thick as the humid air before a storm. The entire village stood frozen, watching as the dogs closed in, their backs echoing through the open square. Their fur bristled, teeth bared, their eyes burning with an intensity that no one had ever seen before. Fear clutched the hearts of the villagers, but it was not just fear of the dogs, it was fear of what Ife had yet to confess. The elders stood in a semicircle, their staffs planted firmly in the ground as they waited, their gazes like daggers piercing into the trembling woman before them. "Speak now," Chief Odigon commanded, his deep voice reverberating across the square. "If you do not, we will let the spirits decide your fate." Ife's chest rose and fell in quick, panicked breaths. She turned, her desperate eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. She was met with suspicion, anger, and a sliver of something worse, anticipation. The villagers wanted to know. They had always known that something about her was not right, and now they demanded the truth. She swallowed, her throat dry, and then, in a voice so quiet that the villagers had to strain to hear, she said, it is not what you think. The elder woman, Ayabuseo, took a cautious step forward. Then tell us, child. Why do the dogs fear you? Ife's lips trembled. They do not fear me. Then what? Olikan, the dog seller, demanded. Why do they bark at you as though you are not of this world? Ife's knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the dusty ground. The dogs did not pounce on her, but neither did they retreat. They stood at the ready, their eyes locked onto her every move. Finally, she took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I am cursed. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ayabuseo frowned. Cursed? Ife nodded slowly. The dogs, they know. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. To be cursed was no small thing. Curses were spoken of in hushed voices, whispered warnings passed down from generation to generation. Ife's confession had turned fear into outright terror. What curse? Chief Odigan asked, his grip tightening on his staff. Ife clenched her fist. A long time ago, in another village far from here, I did something terrible. The villagers leaned in, their curiosity battling with their fear. Even the dogs seemed to be listening. I was once a healer, she continued, her voice growing steadier. My mother taught me the ways of herbs, of roots, of the spirits that dwell within nature. People came to me for help, and I never turned anyone away. Ayabuseo nodded slowly. Healing was a sacred art, one that required wisdom and balance. But then, Ife's voice cracked, there was a man. A powerful man. His name was Agbej, and he was the chief's first son. Murmurs ran through the crowd. He came to me in the dead of night, begging for something I could not give. What did he want? Jair, the young man who had first tried to befriend her, asked. Ife's eyes darkened. Power. A ripple of shock passed through the villagers. He wanted a charm that would make him invincible in battle, she explained. He was afraid that his younger brother, who was strong and favored by the elders, would take his place as the next chief. He wanted something, anything, that would make him more powerful. Ayabuseo's breath hitched. And did you give it to him? Ife shook her head. No. I refused. I told him that power like that comes at a cost. But he would not accept my answer. She closed her eyes, as if trying to block out the memory. The next day, my mother was found dead. A stunned silence fell over the village. She had been poisoned, Ife whispered. And I knew it was him. The villagers' gazes turned dark. The murder of a healer was an unforgivable crime, for healers were chosen by the spirits themselves. I confronted him, she continued, but he laughed in my face. He told me that if I did not give him what he wanted, he would destroy everything I loved. Chief Odigon exhaled sharply. And so? Ife's hands shook as she spoke. So I cursed him. A collective gasp rang through the crowd. I called upon the spirits of the land and the sky, she continued, her voice filled with sorrow. I asked them to take away his strength, to make him weak so that he could never harm anyone again. The villagers stared, wide-eyed. Curses were not cast lightly. A healer turning to darkness was a dangerous thing. What happened? Jair asked. Ife's lips pressed together. It worked. Murmurs erupted through the crowd. The next morning, Agbej could not stand. His limbs had become weak, his body frail. He was the strongest warrior in the village, and overnight, he became no stronger than a child. But then, she continued, her eyes filling with tears, something else happened. The curse did not stop with him. The villagers tensed. It spread, she said hoarsely. One by one, the dogs in my village began to change. They became restless, aggressive. They barked all night, howling as if in mourning. And then, they turned on me. The dogs around her growled lowly, as if remembering the tale. I did not understand at first, she said. But then I realized the spirits were punishing me. The dogs knew what I had done. They sensed the power I had used, the darkness I had called upon. And they would never forgive me for it. The villagers stood in horrified silence. Wherever I go, Ife whispered, the dogs know. They always know. She looked around, her eyes pleading. I did not mean for this to happen. I only wanted justice for my mother. But the spirits, they are not so easily controlled. A tense silence followed her words. The villagers had heard of curses before, but never like this. Never something so powerful, so relentless. Chief Odigon sighed deeply, rubbing his temple. And what do you expect us to do now? Ife lowered her head. I do not know. The dogs still stood around her, their bodies coiled with tension, their growls fading but not gone. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Ayabuseo stepped forward. You have suffered, she said. But curses do not lift themselves. Ife's eyes widened. You mean? The old woman nodded. You must make amends. Chief Odigon straightened. If you wish to stay in this village, Ife, you must find a way to undo what you have done. Otherwise. He did not finish, but everyone knew what he meant. Ife's presence endangered them all. If the spirits were still angry, they would not rest until justice had been served. Ife swallowed hard. I will do whatever it takes. The elders exchanged looks, then nodded. Then you will begin tomorrow, Ayabuseo said. At dawn, we will call upon the spirits. And you will ask them for mercy. Ife closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She had thought she had escaped her past. But now, she realized, her journey was only beginning. The morning arrived with an air of heavy anticipation. The sun barely peeked over the horizon as the village gathered beneath the towering baobab tree at the heart of Ilugino. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, and the distant calls of ravens punctuated the silence. Ife stood in the center of the sacred circle, her bare feet pressed against the cool earth. The elders, adorned in ceremonial robes, formed a half-moon around her, their faces carved with unreadable expressions. The villagers watched from the shadows, whispering amongst themselves, their gazes flickering between fear and fascination. Ayabuseo, the eldest of the village seers, stepped forward, her staff thumping against the ground. Ife, she began, her voice slow and deliberate, you have carried a burden for many moons. Today, we will see if the spirits will grant you mercy. Ife swallowed hard, nodding. She had spent the night preparing, praying to the ancestors, pleading for guidance. The dogs had howled throughout, their cries echoing into the darkness like an omen. Now, as she stood before the gathered village, she realized that her fate was no longer in her own hands. A shallow pit had been dug in the center of the sacred circle. Within it, a mixture of sacred leaves and charred bones smoldered, releasing tendrils of thick smoke. The ritual of atonement was not one performed lightly. It required the intercession of the spirits, and if they found Ife's heart impure, there would be consequences. Chief Odigon stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The spirits demand a trial, he said, his deep voice resonating through the silent air. They must hear your truth. Only then will they decide if you are worthy of release. Ife clenched her fist. She had spoken the truth once, but now, she had to relive it before all of them. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and began. I have told you of Agbej, of what he did to my mother, she said. But I did not tell you what happened after. The villagers leaned in, their curiosity tinged with fear. After I cursed him, I ran, Ife continued. I did not wait to see the extent of my actions. I feared that if I stayed, the spirits would punish me as well. Did you regret it? Ayabuseo asked, her gaze piercing. Ife's lips trembled. Yes. But my regret came too late. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The morning after I left, the village fell into chaos, she said. Agbe's sickness spread, not just to him, but to the others. His father, his mother, his younger brother. They all grew weak, their limbs failing them. The dogs, once protectors of the village, turned wild. They attacked livestock, frightened children, and eventually, they came for the elders. The villagers gasped. By the time I heard of what had happened, it was too late. My home was no longer a home. The spirits had taken everything. She exhaled shakily. So I ran. I traveled from village to village, seeking a way to undo what I had done. But everywhere I went, the dogs knew. They sensed the curse on my soul. And they would not let me rest. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. The crackling of the sacred fire was the only sound. Chief Odigon exchanged glances with Ayabuseo before speaking again. The spirits are listening, Ife. But words alone will not be enough. They demand a test. Ife's breath caught in her throat. A test. Ayabuseo nodded. To break a curse, one must prove their sincerity. The spirits will not be swayed by tears or regrets. You must enter the sacred grove alone. If they deem you worthy, you will return unharmed. If they do not. She did not finish, but the meaning was clear. A chill ran through Ife's spine. The sacred grove lay beyond the village, a dense forest where the spirits were said to walk freely. It was a place few dared to enter, for those who did not return were never spoken of again. But she had no choice. I will go, she whispered. The villagers stepped aside as Ife made her way to the path leading into the forest. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the distant echoes of unseen forces. The dogs, still watching her from the village perimeter, whined lowly, as if sensing what was to come. As Ife crossed the threshold of the sacred grove, she felt the weight of the spirits pressing against her skin. The trees loomed like silent watchers, their twisted branches forming clawed hands against the sky. She took slow, measured steps, her heart hammering in her chest. The deeper she ventured, the more the air grew heavy, thick with an energy she could not name. Then, suddenly, a voice, a whisper, ancient and hollow. Why have you come? Ife froze. Her breath was shallow, her knees weak. She forced herself to kneel, pressing her forehead to the earth. I seek forgiveness, she said. I seek release. The wind rustled through the leaves, but the voice remained. And do you understand the weight of your actions? Ife's throat tightened. Yes. I do. A pause. Then, a shadow moved between the trees. At first, it was barely more than a flicker, but then it took form, a figure, neither fully human nor fully spirit, standing at the edge of her vision. Its eyes burned like embers, its presence exuding raw power. You broke the balance, the voice accused. You called upon us, and we answered. Now you wish to undo what has been done. Ife swallowed hard. I do not ask for my own sake, she whispered. I ask for those who still suffer because of me. The figure stepped closer. The ground beneath Ife trembled. The curse was bound in blood, it said. It can only be undone with sacrifice. Ife's heart pounded. What kind of sacrifice? The figure extended a long, clawed hand. Your essence. Your life. You must choose. She felt the air tighten around her. The spirits demanded payment. Either she surrendered herself, or the curse would never be lifted. Tears streamed down her face. She had run for so long, fought against this fate. But now, she saw the truth. This was the cost of what she had done. With trembling hands, she reached out. Then take me. The moment her fingers touched the spirit's hand, a gust of wind howled through the grove, a deafening roar that rattled the trees. Ifil felt her body grow light, as though she were floating. The spirit's grip tightened, and for a brief moment, she saw flashes, her mother's face, Agbage's laughter before his corruption, the village she had left behind. And then, suddenly, the pressure vanished. Ifil collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The spirit was gone. The grove was silent. The heaviness in the air had lifted. She looked down at her hands, still whole. Still alive. A whisper drifted through the air. It is done. With weak limbs, she stood. The path leading back to the village seemed clearer, the weight of years of suffering finally lifting from her soul. She had passed the trial. And now, she had to return, to face the village once more, and to see if the spirits had truly granted her a second chance. Ifil emerged from the sacred grove just as the first light of dawn kissed the horizon, her body trembling but whole. The villagers had remained awake throughout the night, gathered around small fires, murmuring prayers and speculations about what her fate would be. When she appeared at the edge of the village, her silhouette framed against the first golden rays of sunlight, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. She returns, Ayabuseo whispered, gripping her staff tightly. The spirits have made their choice. The dogs that had once growled and snarled at her now stood eerily silent, their ears packed, their eyes following her every movement but no longer filled with the same hostility. A slow murmur of uncertainty spread through the village as Ifil stepped into the clearing, her bare feet pressing into the cool earth, her breath shallow yet steady. She looked different, not in form, but in presence. The weight that had once clung to her like a shadow seemed lifted, and for the first time, she held her head high. Chief Odigon stepped forward, his gaze searching hers for an answer. "What did the spirits tell you?" he asked, his voice measured but firm. "Is the curse broken?" Ifil took a deep breath. "The spirits have accepted my plea for atonement," she said. "But the price has already been paid." A murmur of confusion swept through the crowd. "What do you mean?" Jair, the young man who had once tried to befriend her, asked. "You still stand before us. You did not perish." Ifil's gaze softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, weary smile. "That is because the spirits did not require my death," she explained. "They required my surrender." Ayabuseo stepped forward, her eyes filled with the wisdom of years. "Explain, child." Ifil nodded, choosing her words carefully. "The curse was never about Agbage alone," she said. "It was about balance. When I called upon the spirits to punish him, I did so out of anger, not justice. That imbalance is what caused the sickness to spread beyond him, to taint not only his bloodline but the land itself. The dogs sensed this, they knew I had broken a law far older than any of us." The villagers listened in rapt silence. "In the grove, the spirits gave me a choice," she continued. "They told me that the only way to mend what had been broken was to give up what I had taken, to return balance by offering myself in service, rather than sacrifice." Chief Odigon frowned. "Service?" Ifil nodded. "I am to become a guardian of the spirits," she said. "One who walks between the worlds of the living and the unseen, ensuring that justice is never again twisted by human emotions. I will be neither fully of this village nor fully of the spirit world. I will walk the path of atonement, guiding others who might be tempted by vengeance as I once was." The weight of her words settled over the village. No one had ever heard of such a fate, yet none could deny that the shift in the air around them was real. The dogs, once tormented by her presence, now sat calmly at the edge of the gathering, their heads bowed as if in reverence. A young woman from the crowd, eyes wide with wonder, spoke. "Then, you are no longer cursed." Ifil met her gaze. "Not in the way I was," she admitted. But I am no longer free, either. My life is no longer my own, it belongs to the spirits now. A heavy silence followed her words. Some looked upon her with newfound respect, others with lingering weariness. But there was no more fear, no more hostility. The villagers who had once whispered about sending her away now stood in quiet contemplation, realizing that she had become something more than just a woman seeking redemption. Chief Odigon exhaled deeply, then turned to Ayabuseo. What say you, wise one? Do the spirits speak the truth? The old woman closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she nodded. The spirits have spoken, she said. And they do not speak lightly. Ifel is no longer just one of us, she is something greater now. To reject her would be to reject the will of forces beyond our understanding. Chief Odigon considered her words before turning back to Ifel. Then you will stay, he said. But your path will be your own. You are not bound to this village, nor are you cast from it. You will go where the spirits need you. Ifel nodded, her heart heavy yet light all at once. She had spent years running, seeking a place to belong. Now, she understood, she had not been meant to belong in one place at all. She was meant to walk the path of those who could not, to bridge the world of spirits and mortals so that no one else would make the same mistake she had. The villagers slowly dispersed, each of them trying to make sense of what had just transpired. Some approached Ifel hesitantly, offering words of quiet acceptance. Jer smiled at her, his previous fear replaced with admiration. You are stronger than any of us realized, he said. Ifel gave him a small, tired smile. I had no choice but to be. As the day continued, life in Elugina began to return to normal, though whispers of Ifel's transformation spread to neighboring villages. Travelers came seeking her wisdom, bringing tales of injustices they hoped she could mend. The once feared woman became a legend in her own right. That night, as Ifel sat beneath the baobab tree, the dogs of the village gathered around her, not in aggression, but in companionship. One by one, they lay at her feet, as if acknowledging her new role. She ran her fingers through the fur of the nearest one, feeling its warmth, its acceptance. She was no longer just Ifel the cursed. She was Ifel the healer, the wanderer, the bridge between two worlds. And for the first time in a long, long while, she felt at peace. As the days turned to weeks, and the weeks into moons, the village of Elugina gradually adjusted to the presence of the woman who had once been feared. Ifel, once shunned and whispered about in hushed voices, now moved freely through the village, her steps carrying a quiet authority that neither demanded submission nor invited rejection. The dogs that had once barked and growled in fear now followed her like silent sentinels, as if acknowledging the shift that had taken place. It was said that wherever she walked, the air carried the faint scent of the sacred grove, a lingering reminder of the spirit's claim on her soul. She had accepted her fate, but she had also chosen to define it in her own way. Though she was now bound to the spirits, she did not vanish into the realm of unseen forces, nor did she isolate herself as a wandering ghost. Instead, she became something the villagers had never expected, a guide, a mediator, a protector of those who did not understand the unseen forces around them. When disputes arose that could not be solved by men alone, Ifel was sought for counsel. When ailments plagued the land and the traditional healers could not find the cause, she was called to listen to the whispers of the spirits. And when restless energies disturbed the peace, she alone had the power to calm them. Her first true test came during the festival of the ancestors. It was a time of celebration, when the people honored those who had come before them with feast, music, and dance. But that year, something was different. The wind carried a restless energy, and the village dogs, though no longer hostile toward Ifel, seemed uneasy, pacing the outskirts of the gathering grounds with ears pressed flat against their heads. Ayabuseo noticed it first. Something stirs in the beyond, she murmured as she watched the flames of the ceremonial fire flicker unnaturally. The chief's eldest son, Adewale, dismissed her concerns. "It is only the wind," he said. "Do not let old fears cloud your mind." But Ife knew better. She could feel the shift in the air, the disturbance that rippled just beneath the surface of the celebration. As the villagers danced and sang, she stood still, listening. And then she heard it, a voice, thin and wavering, carried on the night breeze. It spoke no words, only a wail of sorrow so deep that it sent shivers crawling down her spine. The spirits were not pleased. Without hesitation, she moved toward the edge of the village, where the trees loomed like silent watchers against the darkened sky. The dogs followed, their bodies tensed, their eyes glowing in the dim light. She did not know what she would find, only that she had been called. The further she walked, the heavier the air became. Then, suddenly, she saw it, a shadow, barely visible between the trees, flickering like a dying flame. It took the form of a man, but its movements were not of the living. It drifted, weightless and sorrowful, its presence sending a chill through Ife's bones. "Who are you?" she called, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at the edges of her mind. The shadow did not answer at first. Then, slowly, it turned, and she saw its face, Agbeji. Her breath caught. It had been years since she had spoken his name, years since she had last laid eyes upon the man who had once begged her for power. But it was not the Agbeji she remembered. His once proud frame was now twisted with anguish, his features contorted with the weight of something far greater than human suffering. He opened his mouth, and when he spoke, his voice was no longer filled with arrogance. "Ife," he rasped. "You have freed yourself, but I remain." The realization struck her like a blow to the chest. In her quest for redemption, she had been granted atonement. But Agbeji had never received the same. His soul had been trapped between worlds, neither fully alive nor at rest, bound to the curse she had placed upon him. Tears stung her eyes. "I never meant for this," she whispered. The spirit flickered, its form shifting like smoke in the wind. "Then release me." She swallowed hard, knowing what needed to be done. She knelt, pressing her hands to the earth, and called upon the spirits one last time. "Great ones," she whispered, "I ask for mercy. Not for myself, but for him." The wind howled through the trees, carrying her words into the unseen. The dogs, sensing the shift, sat in silent vigil, their eyes locked on the restless soul before them. The air grew still. Then, like a whisper of breath upon a candle flame, Agbeji's form began to dissolve. His twisted features softened, the torment in his eyes replaced with something else, relief. He gazed at Ife one last time, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Then, with the faintest sigh, he was gone. A deep stillness settled over the grove. The weight that had clung to the land for so long lifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ife felt truly free. When she returned to the village, the festival had continued, but there was a new reverence in the air. Aya Buseo met her at the entrance, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "It is done," the old woman murmured. Ife nodded. "It is done." That night, the village dogs did not howl. The wind carried no restless voices, only the gentle rustling of the trees. And for the first time since she had set foot in Elugina, Ife allowed herself to rest. She had walked a path few could ever understand. She had faced the consequences of her past, atoned for the sins she had carried, and found a new purpose in a world that had once rejected her. She was no longer the cursed one. She was Ife, the woman who had defied fate. And her legend would live on for generations to come. Thank you besties for watching till the end. What do you think of this story, and did it remind you of anyone? Please share in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to Folktales by IJ, so we can keep bringing you inspiring African folktale stories on Folktales by IJ.